stand in solidarity, and this is about honoring the dead, but it's about fighting like hell for the living.
Just remember, Trayvon could have been your son, could have been my baby, could have been anyone in America's baby.
What happened really raised my level of, paranoia, being a young, black man in America.
Trayvon Martin is going to be very much like Medgar Evers, like Martin Luther King, like many of the other folks who've been martyrs. But we will get something out of it because we're going to continue to fight. We will. This is no different than when I got involved in the civil rights movement.
I want change so that later I will be able to walk home from a movie or whatever and not be shot.
Some of the reaction people, really coast to coast, are having after the verdict came down. Protests, they broke out across the country as many saw the verdict as a blow to civil rights. Newspapers across the country lead with headlines expressing outrage. But what does this really say about race relations in the country today? And I want to bring back Wilbur Aldridge, who's obviously involved with the NAACP, as you said at the introduction. And you said this nation, I think it's fair to say, is still uncomfortable talking about race. That said, I remember talking about this weekend, and I said, raise your hands if you think if Trayvon was white, he'd be alive right now. And everybody agreed, regardless of where they fall politically. Amazingly, that didn't really change things at the end of the day. But if there's a bigger takeaway from this on the racial angle, what does it say?
I think the bigger takeaway is the fact that we need to talk. We need to discuss openly how race plays in all aspects of life. We need to look at the statistics indicating how young black males are viewed in this country, throughout any area, not just in Sanford, Florida, or in New York City. I think there is a consistency in how young black males are viewed throughout this country, and that in itself promotes people like George Zimmerman to do the types of things they do. They automatically assume there are people, I mean, we have gone, it used to be driving while black, we've gotten to the point where it's walking while black.
But the biggest takeaway in this is, you're stating it in one way, as a Caucasian who's worked as a civil rights lawyer for 35 years, the biggest takeaway is that there is a profound devaluation of African Americans. You're talking about young black males. My practice involves a lot more than young black males. Includes them, but involves a lot more. There's a devaluation in the culture, in every sphere of social life of African Americans that is not significantly and markedly changed. Mm-hmm. Whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in education, wherever in whatever it is. Part of that is seen in every American city where we've been able for generations to allow degradation to continue to affect and radically alter the life scope and life path of black young people. That's been allowed generation after generation. It reflects a profound devaluation. Right. And this case is a continuation of that devaluation because, as Mr. French said earlier, the life of that African-American young man was not taken as seriously as the life of a young white man in that same exact situation would have been. I
agree with you, Michael. However, in those particular instances that you're talking about, there certainly needs to be addressed, but you don't die from those.
You do. You can die from a healthcare system. You die from a healthcare system.
You can die for inadequate treatment. Mm-hmm. However, you don't. In this instance, if you're black and male and walking in any particular neighborhood, not just down there, the chances are that if you don't die, you're going to die in jail because they will pick you up for whatever it is that they may think that you might be doing or going to do.
But you know what, Richard? What's been good about the aftermath of this verdict that's come down? One, that there's been no real violence across America.
And don't you think, Dominic, a lot has to do with the Martin family? I mean, the grace those parents had.
Yes. But what I'm about to point out, Richard, I do agree that they've been very graceful in terms of making sure there's no violence, calling for peace. But notice the outrage across America. It's not just black folks out there. There are white folks out there protesting too. There are Asian Americans. There is a rainbow coalition of Americans that have come together to say that this is not right. But my final point, you know, a number of points have been said about what if Mr. Zimmerman was African American? Well, we already know it's all over the internet. The young lady, Marissa Alexander, her husband, a domestic violence situation. She fired the gun into the ceiling. Right now, she's in jail 20 years. 20 years. And you have an African-American boy that's dead that only had iced tea and a Skittles, and his gunman is about to get his gun back. Where's the justice?
Well, I think you also have to look at Mayor Bloomberg and people who think that stop and frisk is fine, because, see, stop and frisk empowers people like Zimmerman, and these laws, which are drafted by ALEC, by the way, which our legislatures tend to adopt without even reading them, because most of these laws are identical from state to state because they're drafted by corporate public interest, not public interest, but corporate interest, special interest. All of these laws are there to make the likelihood that anybody suffers a violent end much greater. So you are now, if you get into a confrontation with someone and that person, like George Zimmerman, goes to school to learn exactly how far they can push stand your ground, your argument can turn into you getting killed.
Well, they said at Mayo that the advantage goes to the survivor now in Florida. And Andrew, this is about race, but to me it's also about guns. If you think about it for a second, from at least what I've learned about Zimmerman throughout the trial, he wasn't getting out of the car if he didn't have a gun, okay? As much as he wanted to be a cop or whatever, you know, he maybe, you know, had the size, but he didn't have, you know, what to back it up. So the bizarre nature of this is not only, as Dominic says, he gets his gun back here, but in many ways, what's the message that comes out of this? In concealed carry states, where you have these things like stand your ground, what's the downside for an idiot to go looking for trouble? And I really think guns are as much a part of this conversation as it is about the race, about some of the flawed things on the books right now. But if you didn't have a gun, the kid would be alive here tonight.
I think that's one of the parts of the conversation that maybe isn't getting as much attention. We talk a lot about gun laws and access to guns, background checks, and people who should be excluded from purchasing a gun. But laws like Stand Your Ground enable people who have guns to use them more freely and without repercussion. And it may have not just had an impact on Zimmerman's actions in this case, but also the actions of the police department in investigating. Remember, there were days before he was arrested, or I think maybe a couple of weeks before Zimmerman was arrested, before the Sanford Police Department really launched a formal investigation. Part of that was because of Stand Your Ground, because the assumption is that he's immediately justified in using that deadly force. So that may have hindered the prosecution in this case. We talk about a flawed prosecution. They may not have had all the tools that they needed in this case because of laws like Stand Your Ground.
But the important issue is that guns are not separate from race. And I think separating the two is artificial. One of the rationales for guns is that our citizenry is so endangered. What's so endangering our citizenry? Well, what's so endangering our citizenry in many areas is the stereotypic view of young black men.
But it's not just a stereotype. Yeah. We have to be honest. There's a problem with black-on-black crime.
Understood.
And there's a problem with crime in the black community with black men committing crime.
Understood.
And we got to call it for what it is.
But the point is, don't separate it from race. If you want to put it that way, put it that way. But it's clearly connected to race.
You also have to look at it and say that Zimmerman was not threatened by black-on-black crime. He's a kid walking through a neighborhood. He's not committing any crime at all. So really what we're talking about, and it's not such a huge black-on-white crime. It's more black-on-black crime, actually.
Mayor, I had a question, which I know we got to go to break here, but the one thing that really stuck with me out of this, beyond even from an amateur standpoint, looking what the prosecutor was doing and wondering what they were doing, was it seemed at the end of the day, the cops telling him to stay in his car didn't make any difference on the outcome of the trial. And to me, before this started, I thought that was, bad pun here, but the smoking gun, which was cops say don't get involved, stay out of it, and you disregard a police directive and go to get involved that leads to the death of an unarmed kid with Skittles and an iced tea. I thought, slam dunk. But it didn't seem to matter, and to me that never made any sense. How it's as if whether you made the phone call or not didn't change anything. I thought it changed everything sitting in my living room watching the case.
But this is in Florida. It's a place where,
Might as well be Mars, it sounds like.
and at the end of the day, it's a place where people love their guns. And when you turn around and after losing this case,
But
the
cops
state
told
attorney,
him, stay out of it.
but the state attorney still spends a good part of her presentation talking about how she supports the right to bear arms. And at the end of the day, imagine if, I think what may happen here is you may find lots of young African Americans being brought for their gun license right when they're brought for their automobile license, and they're being taught how to prepare
Just
for
think
stand
about
your
what a
ground.
scary thought is. All right, we jump to break here. And when we come back, I'm bringing you at home into our conversation, and we're also going to be talking about what's next here for this. The feds have indicated they're looking into this. Should this administration get involved into this case? Could they actually win this kind of a case? We'll talk about the thresholds they'd have to hit here. Stay with us, everybody. We'll be right back.